Great. So, welcome everyone today to our Lancs Can Lunch and Learn session with the theme of arts and culture. Today we've got two speakers from different arts organisations across the county. So we've got Miranda from Lancaster Arts, and we have Tom from Down to Earth in Wigan, who's sort of creeping back into sort of old historic boundaries of Lancashire. So I just took a quick blurb from both their websites, so please bear with me if there's something wrong, but if you can correct me. So Down to Earth invites residents of Wigan to shape and create local, national, international art across the borough that happens within minutes rather than hours of our homes, schools, and safe spaces, focusing on green spaces and community hubs as sites for cultural engagement. And Lancaster Arts are producing an exciting new commission called Are You Lost, with artist Rob St John alongside the Forest of Bowland National Landscape, which is part of a national programme called Nature Calling, in partnership with the Activate Performing Arts and the National Landscapes Association. So it'd be great to hear more from both of them. So I will get started. Miranda, if you start us off, and she'll tell us all about her programme and projects.
Sure, let me just share my thing. Hang on. Sorry, my PowerPoint will arrive shortly. But I can start chatting. How about that? I'm Miranda. There you go. Hopefully you can all see a slide now. So I'm Miranda. I am curator at Lancaster Arts, and over the next 15-20 minutes, I'm going to share a little bit about our approach and then illustrate that through a couple of projects, including the one that Sam referenced in the introduction, Are You Lost? I'm going to talk about our work that is around exploring environmental justice and access to nature through contemporary combined arts. So just for a little bit of context, because I realise, not everyone will know who we are. So Lancaster Arts is the professional contemporary arts organisation that is part of Lancaster University. So we're, on the Lancaster University campus, just outside the city. And we are also an Arts Council England, part of Arts Council England's national portfolio. And our tagline is where ideas, people and places connect. And I think that's quite important for what I'm talking about today, that the idea of art being a space where people can explore and encounter ideas and make those connections. We present a contemporary combined arts programme across all different art forms, so performance, dance, music, spoken word, visual arts, and quite often the artists we're working with don't fit neatly into one of those boxes or another. And we're doing that, here on the campus, in our art spaces, so the gallery, the theatre, but increasingly more and more of our work is taking the form of kind of site-specific commissions and projects that take us beyond the campus, into the city centre, onto Morecambe seafront and out across the wider county. And that's the work really that I'm going to focus on more today. So this comes from our mission and vision. Lancaster Arts' vision is of a world where social and environmental justice drives change for our future and is inspired and provoked by artistic practice. Our mission is to create the conditions for art to make change alongside our collaborators. So that's quite a kind of lofty ambition. And I would be the first to say, I think it's a thing we're working towards, maybe more than a thing we absolutely are at the moment. But I wanted to share a bit about, okay, what does that look like to say that what we do is centered around social and environmental justice? And we chose that language quite purposefully because we are, of course, interested in the role that we can play in relation to climate action and the climate crisis, but we wanted to be thinking about that in this broader framing of environmental justice. So when we set out to, to kind of address this mission, the first thing, we did was try to have a meaningful conversation with each other and with relevant artists, collaborators, partners about what that might mean and what it might look like. I'm sorry, it's a very dull slide, but it's there to serve a purpose, which is to say that, we're really fortunate being at a university. It comes with some challenges, but we've got access to all kinds of different thinking, all kinds of different brains, including the Lancaster Environment Centre. And the guy in this slide, Gordon Walker, literally wrote the textbook on environmental justice. So this is an image of him coming and chatting to us and our board and helping us think through our ideas around that. But we also, we wanted to, to come up with an approach that was resonated and felt meaningful to a wider range of people. So this is back in December 2023, I think. Yes. And we do this about 3 times a year. We call it a creative gathering, and we invite into a space a carefully selected assortment of people. Some of them will be artists, some of them will be researchers from different disciplines, some of them will be people whose jobs or kind of professions relate to the topic in hand. Some of them might be activists or, just very engaged in the community. So we invited these people to have a conversation about environmental justice. This is in the Eco Hub on the campus. And it happened in December. It's very cold. But we and the nature of a creative gathering is that rather than just talking about a theme or a topic, what happens first of all is everybody takes part in some creative experiential activities that have been designed by usually artists, sometimes other people, to kind of offer different ways in of thinking about the topic in hand. So we'd invited everyone to bring an object with them that in some way resonated for them with the idea of environmental justice, and then we sort of arranged these into different museums. This was the Museum of Uncertain Futures. But we'd also done some thinking in advance. We'd written out what we thought environmental justice might mean and be about, and then we invited people to kind of respond and give their feedback about whether it was meaningful, what sense it made to them, etc. And we took all of that and in the end ended up with an environmental justice statement, which you can find on our website. There's a hyperlink there. I could send it out as well. And I think, these kinds of things, making statements and putting them on websites, it can sometimes feel a bit tokenistic. But actually, I think what's felt really positive about this is it's given us this kind of touchstone that we can relate back to in terms of what do we mean by this. But also, when we're forming new partnerships, when we're inviting artists to be involved in what we do, whether it's through residencies or commissions, it gives us something, we share this environmental justice statement with them, and we ask them to explain to us how the idea that they're coming to us with, how the thing they want to do resonates with this. So, and I do feel we're really seeing the fruits of it come through in terms of kind of conversations about environmental justice being baked in at the starting point of more of what we're doing. So then my couple of examples. The first one is Landing, which was a project we did in 2024, and it kind of culminated in a sort of mini 3-day festival of artistic fun and games on the seafront at Morecambe's West End, with various things going on in some shipping containers, and at the heart of that, 2 significant commissions, which had come about through a partnership with a kind of umbrella organisation called We Live Here. I'm not going to read through all of this slide, but I think I've put it there because it helps, I think, talk about, on the one hand, finding partners who are interested in exploring similar stuff, but also that bit I've highlighted in yellow, We Live Here, connects local and global perspectives. It asks how the arts can serve as a catalyst for conversations between local communities, nationally and internationally, about the environmental challenges that face our planet and all of us who live on it. And that connecting of very local with global concerns, I think, is a thread that really goes through this work. So the way that Landing came about was, it was a project that actually, well, the nationwide project was actually called On Our Doorsteps, but the commissioning project happened in 3 different locations across the UK, and Lancaster was one of them. There were 4 different artists involved, 2 of which worked with us. So we worked with a Finnish diaspora artist called Henna Asakainen, who's based in the northeast, and Breakwater, who were a collective of Korean diaspora artists, mainly based in London. And those artists came and they spent a couple of weeks doing research and development residencies, really getting to know the place, in this case, the Morecambe coastline, spending time with local, again, researchers, volunteers, artists, people who had an interest in the environment. And then from all those interactions, they started developing these site-specific commissions that would be then shared at this mini festival. And here you're seeing them on a walk on a really rainy February day, with a locally based artist, Anthony Paget, and they are standing around. I don't know if any of you recognise this. It's a sculpture that Anthony made that commemorates the Morecambe Bay cockle picking tragedy, and that story, with its really deep local resonance, I think it was the 20th anniversary as well that year, became the starting point for the work that Tay and Young Suk from Breakwater made. So they made this artwork called Cockles of My Heart. It was an audio sound piece that you experienced so everyone gathered on the beach. We all had headphones, actually kindly lent by In Situ, so thank you, Paul. And walked out across the sands listening to this sound piece that had a mix of music, of recordings of people's voices, that that dealt with the legacy of the cockle picking tragedy, but also kind of situated that in a bigger conversation about exploitation, the exploitation of human beings, of migrant workers, but also the exploitation of nature, the overexploitation of the cockle beds, and kind of linked to a global conversation about exploitation of people and of nature. The other commission that was part of that was Nest, which was Henna's commission. So Henna's really interested in thinking about movement and migration and the idea of how you make a home in a new place, but also, kind of that almost cognitive dissonance of like how you try and make a home in a place while we're simultaneously actually destroying our, macro home that is the world. And this act of creating a net, inviting people to come together and make a nest together as a way of having conversations about that, was what was at the heart of her work. So, and this practice comes in part out of her own experience of having migrated to the UK, her grandparents' experience of being refugees, but also lots of conversations with people who were going through the asylum seeking system in Newcastle at the time. So then, final example, you might be pleased to know, is Nature Calling, which is the bigger project that Are You Lost is part of. So this is this year's big project, and it is initiated by the National Landscapes Association. For those of you who, don't keep up with your Quango lingo, the National Landscapes is the rebranding of what used to be called Areas of Outstanding Natural Beauty. So we're lucky in Lancashire, obviously, we have a few, and this one is working with the Forest of Bowland National Landscape, and then Nature Calling overall is working with 5 other national landscapes around England. So it's, it's quite an ambitious project, and it's an example of, it's co-funded by the Arts Council and DEFRA, and it's got a real focus around, engaging people with the landscapes that might be on their doorstep, but that they may not be accessing, and doing that partly through kind of bringing new voices and innovative artwork made in collaboration with the communities close to those landscapes. And so Are You Lost is the project that that we at Lancaster Arts have been the regional producers on. So the main artist is Rob St. John. Rob is, Lancashire born and bred, grew up more around Nelson, I think, now Lancaster based. And Rob has been working since the autumn with people from both inside and outside the Forest of Bowland, exploring themes of environmental justice, land access, who feels they belong in the landscape, how you access the land, and also kind of personal connections. And he's been doing that through conversations with, with farmers, with landowners, with people who work in the Forest of Bowland, with fell runners and people who use it extensively for leisure, but also with groups of young people, particularly in like Nelson and Burnley, where although the landscape is there, it may not be a thing that they've been, finding accessible and accessing. And all these workshops and pieces and conversations that Rob has been having have then fed into the creation of an artwork that involves sound and film and textile. So it'll be a kind of immersive, thing that you walk into, created in collaboration with a textile artist, Kate O'Farrell. And so the actual, the young people's words, the words of people who've taken part in various workshops and conversations have pulled through into the artwork. It's the film part of the artwork is, Rob decided where to film based partly on people's kind of mapping of their memories and what was significant. And along the way, we've had lots of conversations about kind of land rights and access and some of the more sticky things around accessing nature. That I should say, the title Are You Lost? It's riffing off that, that kind of, if you're out in the landscape and someone says to you, are you lost? Depending on their tone of voice, it might be a lovely, friendly, helpful thing, or it might be a kind of like a signal that they think you don't quite belong. Like, are you lost? Like, what's brought you here? And the project riffs off that. And it invites audiences to delve deeper into what the area represents, consider their own thoughts on this landscape and what it means kind of socially, ecologically, politically, and thinking about its past, but also its future. That photo is some of the kids that Rob was working with getting to be on Countryfile. So that was quite exciting for them, sharing that. And I should say Rob has drawn on, again, like the goodwill and collaboration of lots of organisations in the area, including, again, In Situ and other colleagues who, have been working in this part of the county, obviously much more extensively than we have from our Lancaster base. So come and join us. We're out in Nelson on this Saturday at the Pendle Festival of Culture, alongside lots of other things going on. It's free to come and experience the installation, but there's also, there's conversations, there's screen printing, there's singing, there's lots happening. And then the installation will move to a barn, Ginny's Barn at Dunsop Bridge at the start of August, and then to Gisborne Forest Hub at the end of August. And the idea is very much to to invite people to come and experience the landscape, but also experience this artwork that explores what it means to people. So and there's also lots of podcasts that Rob has created along the way, which really kind of get under the skin. So I think that's probably my time up, but just to kind of wrap up, through these kinds of projects for us at Lancaster Arts, thinking about what our role can be, we're really interested in how, making links between local experiences of environments and global issues, and how arts can be part of that, how we can obviously make these projects sustainable in terms of how they run, how we can kind of create meaningful engagements that respects different ways of knowing a place, and also how we, take something that's a time limited project and make it something that kind of fosters longer term relationships. And then I'm here partly through the mechanism of LANDS, which is Lancashire Arts Network for Developing Sustainability, which is just, what it sounds like. It's a network. You can sign up to an email list. We send emails when we've got an event like this, to be honest, that we want to share with you. And the next one is on the 4th of September and is someone from Julie's Bicycle coming and sharing some expertise and experience. But it's very much a network that is, you know, for people to kind of learn together and share ideas and practice. That's it from me. Thank you for listening.
Brilliant. Thanks, Miranda. Yeah, that was really, really interesting, and really great to hear so much about all the different, well, your approach to the environmental justice and the different projects there. Has anyone got any questions for Miranda about any of the projects she said? Oh yeah, Maya, you've got your hand up.
Hi, first of all, I really enjoyed listening to all of that, so thank you very much. I just wanted to ask, I found it really interesting when you were talking about sort of the use of kind of art and creative methods in kind of research, and that kind of piqued my interest. I've just finished my dissertation, and I used photo voice in my degree for like kind of looking at climate action. And I wanted to ask, from sort of your experience, have you seen kind of any particular impacts of using sort of more creative methods when researching kind of the environment or even having discussions about sustainability?
Yeah, I think, I mean, for us as a university-based arts organisation, our thing is always that we think there's a value to artists and creativity being in the conversation from the outset and not just positioned at the end, which is sometimes where in a research space it's like a scientist goes away and does some research and then they say to the arts sector, you know, can you do the hearts and minds bit? Can you make this palatable, engaging, etc.? And of course, you know, I think there is a space for that as well, but that, you know, if we can actually have conversations between artists and researchers as part of like shaping the questions, formulating, you know, what the research questions are, that feels like a powerful thing. And I think, you know, we're sort of getting there with that. What we find is that when we create opportunities for artists and you know, interdisciplinary researchers to be in spaces together and spend time together, that things do get sparked, that sometimes, you know, they go away and do shape research bids together, etc. That it can, yeah, provide different ways in from the point of view of the researchers. So and I think part of it is, it comes down to this, like being open to different kinds of knowledge as well, particularly if you're talking about like a landscape and you're, you know, I mean, a classic example that people use is sometimes about like flood defenses, or how you deal with like a technical issue like coastal flooding, that if you're open to all kinds of different knowledge, not only an engineering stance, you'll get a richer set of ways of tackling a problem. Anyway, I can see there's other questions, so but I'd be happy to pick up further and have a further conversation.
Thank you.
Harvey, you've got your hand up as well.
Yes. Yeah, thanks, Miranda. Thanks, Maya, for that question as well. So my point was actually going to be what you finished on there anyway, Miranda. So that was something that I took away from it, was the idea of of remembering to allow space for that more creative thinking. So I particularly like even at the beginning, the idea of people bringing something and the idea of how a topic means something to different people. So I think that's something that I'm definitely going to take away and think about for future events. So my other main point really was just to ask for if you could send through, just from a network point of view, if you want to send through those dates and things, we can send those out to the mailing list to all of the I don't know however many 100 members there are now, but we can share those events throughout the network as well.
Thank you. And I think, yeah, just picking up, I think the other thing maybe that the arts, you know, art projects can do in relation to this is, I want to say this in the right way. It's like, you know, conversations about climate and environmental justices and injustices, of course, can be really heavy, and often they should be really heavy. And I think sometimes, I'm thinking about Cockles of My Heart, that walk out on the beach. It was about something that's incredibly bleak in lots of ways, something horrendous that had happened, and also like a macro situation that can be quite bleak. But something about experiencing that together collectively there was something in there that made it hopeful. And, you know, it's not about artists bringing kind of cheery Pollyanna false hope, but that there's, you know, it can provide a different way of feeling about the challenge that, you know, the challenges we're facing.
Great, thanks, Miranda. Diane, you've also got your hand up.
Thanks, Miranda. And I was lucky to be part of some of those things that you illustrated a little bit earlier. I think my issue is how effective in the outcomes of the when you come to review it, how is it reaching the people who are most hard to reach? Who there's a certain demographic who will come to events and experience the extraordinary things that certainly I was part of. But it's just the wider reach, which is where a lot of the perhaps lack of interest. It's about how to spark new interest in the demographic that's not being reached currently about climate change. And just to say, I'm really useful that lands. I'll pick up on that. But yeah, so just interested to know about that, really.
I think you're right, and quite often, yeah, it feels like we're having conversations that can feel okay. They might be interdisciplinary, but they're sort of within a bubble of people who are already concerned, etc. I think, you know, thinking about Morecambe, the fact that we were just there and visible for 3 days for free at the West End of Morecambe, we definitely did encounter plenty of people who would not have like come up onto campus and looked at an art exhibition about climate change. So, you know, that kind of being where people are, it was part of it. And being there long enough that people could take a little while to like get brave enough to come and see what it was actually that we were up to. So, you know, we definitely did meet some different people. Obviously, they're not people who aren't accessing Morecambe Bay. They live at Morecambe Bay, but in terms of like the content of the artwork and ideas. And I think, you know, with the Forest of Bowland project, it's been about working through the people who are doing like deep, long-standing work in those places. So working with young people who are attending Yes Hub or different, you know, youth provision. You're tapping into the expertise in the existing relationship, but what you're offering then is maybe a slightly different angle. You know, those young people had not been for a walk to a farm and used one of the things that I think they really enjoyed doing with Rob was actually the more technical side that related to his art practice, where, you know, he's like sticking microphones into the soil or into a stream and doing that kind of audio recording. And for those young people, I think, you know, the excitement of getting to use some kit and developing some skills was a really positive way in. You know, they didn't necessarily think they were setting out to do a project that was about like their local landscape, but they have found lots of rich things within it through other ways in, and through obviously established community partnerships that, you know, you can only do this work if you're working with the people who are already trusted and know the areas. It doesn't work to parachute in. And, you know, we're really fortunate with all the partners who Rob's been able to work with in those places. And it helps that, you know, Rob is of those places himself and already had a lot of those networks.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Miranda. Yeah, again, really insightful answers to all those questions. I think if anyone doesn't have any more questions, I think we might move on to Tom, so that we don't run out of time. Any more questions finally, or are we all good? I think we're all good. So it seems like Tom's already shared his screen, which is great. So I will hand over to Tom to tell us a bit more about Down to Earth.
Well, I suppose, Diane, actually, you really hit the nail on the head, which is, I suppose, we're interested in the hardest to reach audiences, or what we would probably call the often overlooked communities. So we're one of the Arts Council programmes across the country called Creative People and Places. There are about 40 of us now, and some of them will be in places that you know. There is an excellent one in St Helens. There's an excellent one in Blackpool. There's one that covers a good stretch of the Leeds-Liverpool Canal called Super Slowway. And Down to Earth, I suppose, is the newest of the Northwest CPPs. So we started in 2022, but because of various shenanigans in governance, shall we say, the program really got started around last April, and that means that we have tried to hit the ground running in an interesting way. I suppose the history of creative people and places is that the National Lottery was saying to Arts Council that the people who are buying lottery tickets are not living in the places where people are going to see theatre and art galleries and all the things that the good causes money traditionally funds. So about a decade ago, the Arts Council created two sets of programs that were meant to kind of tackle this, that were put into what you would call cold spots in cultural engagement. And so there were, I think, 3 to start with, and then that network has just grown. Every 3 years, a couple more get added, and there's about 40 of us across the country now, as I say. I came from the one in Corby in Northamptonshire, which is a fascinating place. And I've just moved up to Wigan, so you can hear no Wigan in my accent, though I promise I'm trying to develop the accent every day. I suppose we are interested in climate because as a team, we're in that kind of place. We're interested in all of these things that we can draw together, and those big ideas, those big macro challenges that are facing us. But the main intersection with our program and climate is probably in community power. And what we really try and do is develop new structures of community power, particularly in places that don't have anything at a neighbourhood level. And I suppose the real reason for that is I'm a huge advocate for the neighbourhood, the community level being the most interesting place to do any kind of activism. There's someone who said, and I'm going to butcher the quote, and I also don't remember who said it, which is terrible preparation, but there you are. But he said, if we act alone, it won't be enough. If we wait for government to act, we'll be waiting too long. We won't have enough time. But if we work on communities, we might just be able to achieve something. So I think that really encapsulates our role. And if we can build these communities that kind of have a voice and have a sense of what is possible, then they are in the best place to start to address all the inequalities that they face. But one of those, I suppose, is always going to be kind of climate justice and thinking about Sam. I know we're talking a lot at the moment about Higher Falls, which is in our borough, which is a community that floods very often. It happens to also be one of the poorest communities in the borough, and it's funny how when you look at the dark spots on, I'll show you one of my maps of engagement. Let's see if that's going to come up for you. Yeah, there you are. So the cold spots there. If you put that on the flooding risk map, it overlaps really, really nicely. So our communities, and we all know this, that are facing multiple forms of injustice will also be the first to be impacted by climate, and are potentially those that are thinking least about climate because there's so many other more immediate challenges in their life going on as well. So yeah, we're really interested in community leadership. And I suppose that speaks to our mission, which is on this first slide, which is communities connected with creativity. And one of the pieces of copy I'm always putting in funding bids is that we want communities that are connected to creativity, to nature, and to each other. So I suppose I wanted to talk really about the system that we try and use to create those communities that then have some measure of power. And I suppose the last thing I need to talk about is why art is the best tool for that, for me. And that is because I think an artist can work within a community in a way that doesn't feel in any way parental. They don't come in like a funder and drop money and expect outcomes. An artist is someone who is there to explore. They are an outsider and also a facilitator. They can be part of the conversation. They can bring influence, but also they can create and hold space really, really effectively for a community to fill. So yeah, that's a little bit of a pocket on why art, why community leadership, and how that eventually hopefully leads us to thinking about climate justice. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the down to earth program and how we try and create that. So we aim to take people on a journey so that they join us as an audience member for some activity. Then they become maybe a participant in the next activity, volunteer at the one after that. And then after that, they're starting to make decisions about the kind of arts and culture, but then also events and community that they would like to see happening locally. As Sam said, we often talk about like trying to bring all of the brilliance of, you know, national nature reserves and national theatre right onto people's doorsteps all across the borough of Wigan and Lee. But also, I suppose, to give them ownership of that. So that's the kind of journey. And then we use this model, which we call the engagement cycle. And the idea behind that really is that we're taking individuals and we're taking them on multiple loops of this cycle. So your engagement could be anything. It could be that you walk past one of our big town centre events for the first time and you see it. And then, you know, immediately you move to build capacity because you think, oh, I didn't think that we could do that in, you know, Lee Town Centre. I didn't think we could have 3,000 people at a light parade. And you know what? We can. And that's slightly changed how I think about the town centre. And then you've got the great art. Maybe you see something in that parade, you have a chance to reflect on that. And then maybe you join us on Facebook and you're kind of then re-engaged at another level. So we're taking people always through these loops of the engagement cycle. There's lots of stuff around there about kind of the specific plugins that we use, but I suppose we're always trying to find people who want to go on that kind of creative journey with us. And particularly in some of the estates that we're doing kind of systemic work at, estates maybe that have no community infrastructure, no village club anymore, no community centre. Actually, one of the big pieces of work that we're doing is just kind of being that in that kind of engagement phase for a really, really long time and finding who is the person who's willing to build some capacity, put their name to something, come together, become a group that is interested in this place. And I'll talk maybe a little bit about a specific example of that later. So we have all of these program strands, and again, the program is designed just to create multiple points of entry so that people can start to get engaged a little bit in art, but then kind of develop this confidence to become a leader in their community. So there is ear to the ground, which is lots of small scale things, really where people are maybe joining existing well-attended community events. I'm going to a school fair tomorrow, which isn't finished till 8 o'clock, which I think is insane, but we're going to a school fair. We're going to talk to all of the kids and parents there. And there's going to be a small craft activity that they can do as a kind of first engagement. But we're also going to be signposting into a longer program we're doing called the Borough of Joy, which is all about what brings joy to you and your family and sharing that with another family. So there's kind of always routes onwards. There are the seasonal residencies, which are longer term work with targeted communities. And again, I suppose we're really thinking about those people who have been underserved by culture and by lots of other sectors of our society. So, for instance, we're working with young care leavers. That's a really clear example for us. And we're starting to do some work in residential care settings as well as part of that seasonal residency. So that's a longer term piece of work where we're engaging them to kind of see what they might want to do, and then we're helping them to commission their own art and then think about the kind of change that they would like to see, how they would like to use their voice that they develop through that commission. We have the Groundbreakers, which are our big events. That's about meeting loads and loads of people at once who maybe would never choose to go to a cultural event. And we're thinking kind of parades. We're thinking about, we're going to do a load of public art this time next year as well with communities. So, you know, things that lots and lots of people get a chance to experience in lots of different ways. And then seed commissions, which is more about giving people the money once they've got that bit of leadership. And once they're kind of ready to start doing their own thing, again, in collaboration to explore with an artist, then they can pull in a seed commission. And there's a couple of £1,000s just to make those first steps into developing their own projects for their community and being more self-sustaining. I want to talk about Light Up Lee, which is a big event we do. It's the Christmas lights which are on in Lee, so that reaches an audience that, you know, it isn't going to, for instance, the Turnpike, which is the art gallery in Leeds. You know, 3,000 people come out to see the light switch on. But this year they get treated to a huge lantern parade that was all made in Lee by their kind of children. There are all sorts of different craft groups that have made things for this parade. But I suppose the other layers are, we've got maybe 30 volunteers coming into the festival this year. There is a panel that is making decisions about the route of the festival this year, which artists are getting those commissions. They've decided that Nature's Magic, for instance, is going to be a part of that parade this year. So there's lots of kind of nature-based makes and thinking about the nature around Lee in these communities that we'll be working with as well. So that's a really good example of how we kind of get people at different stages of engagement to think about art, creativity, but then also those wider things that really matter to communities as well. I've done a little bit on the data, so I'll skip the data because, well, there's a lot of it. Okay, and then I suppose these things underpin how we work with communities. They're learning from across the Creative People and Places networks. There are amazing, amazing people who have been doing this work for a really long time. And these are some of the things that they've taught us about how, as arts organisations, but also people who want to share power, we can approach that. So I thought I would share them with you because I think sometimes CVPs are not talked about as much as they should be, saying that as a fairly new director. So I don't take credit for any of this knowledge. So we move at the speed of trust. And I think we all know that when we're trying to partner with a community, trying to have that kind of complex and nuanced discussion with them about something like nature and climate, we have to have that trust, and that just takes a lot of time. Really hard to develop in our kind of project funded world. But yeah, and I suppose the second part of that is the partnership is the project. So if you allow yourself to kind of put all of your outcomes and your, the art that you're going to make at the end, and you really, really focus on the relationship that you're building with the community that you're working with, then actually that's the surest fire way to make whatever art you're doing a success. And I suppose the same goes with an artist as well, really thinking about your relationship with the artist that you're working with to explore this idea and will help you to get a better outcome. Building while flying, and I suppose that's about being adaptable and really taking things that come at you when we're working in communities. This is not often the most important thing that's going on in people's lives. Timelines, by necessity, sometimes need to stretch. Things goes wrong, people change their mind, and that's a really important part of community power, is they're allowed to change their mind. And it can be very frustrating when you're left kind of holding a project that's falling apart because they don't want this anymore. But that's all part of how we're going. Building on what's strong, I suppose, is about that asset-based approach. I think that's really, really difficult in climate sometimes, to see the positive, to see the assets. We're so often coming from a point of kind of, well, with climate crisis, we're always talking about the fear, and actually flipping that on its head for those hard to reach communities, really thinking about what are the assets we have. Can we approach climate change from the point of view is that there's a forest here that you really, really like, and by building connection with that, by building these kind of micro interventions in nature, then we can start to tackle that kind of doomerism and really create something positive and almost some positive activism. Inch wide and mile deep is all about, I suppose, growth and how you have a growth mindset as an organisation. We have a fixed geographical parameters. We're only allowed to work in the borough of Wigan. So when we think about growing, we're thinking about going deeper into our communities and meeting more people and having that deeper impact, and not just meeting the first people who put their hands up in a community, but actually really starting to get into the people who you can't reach in any other way except to have that trust, that deep, deep trust. And then finally, one of the big things is about having permission to fail, I suppose, when you're working with an artist, when you're working with a community. Arts Council, generally, as a funder, gives us permission to fail, understands that not everything works out. You don't always make great art. And I suppose it's about extending that grace to everyone that you're working with, the communities and the artists as well. I hope that is kind of useful. I suppose, as I say, it's very much about how we approach community power, but knowing that community power then roots itself into all of these outcomes for communities, of which building more self-sufficient, more confident communities is a huge output.
Thanks, Tom. That was really interesting as well, just to hear your process and how you've gone about doing what you're doing. Again, I'm going to ask: has anyone got any questions for Tom about Down to Earth or their work? Had a few claps and thumbs up. I'll start. Just interested in the point around we were making about asset-based approach, building on what's strong. Do you think that are you seeing already fruits from those sorts of labours and that sort of perspective and attitude towards climate work and the climate crisis, or do you think that it's still met with the, oh well, it's never gonna, nothing I can do will make a difference sort of attitude?
I think when we are talking to communities about climate, and we are allowing that conversation, I suppose, to happen on their front, there's a disconnect almost between the macro challenges and the local assets. But I think it's good probably to play in that space where the doom feels far away, and all the benefits of engaging with nature, of enriching that local nature, is put at the forefront. So yeah, I think being asset based it probably means that we never bring climate crisis into the conversation. We might have some quite boundaried ways that we work around that. So we there are certain things that we won't allow artists to procure, certain materials like any kind of glitter or microplastic. Like, we have those rules in place, and we'll have that conversation with the community. But actually, that's a very, very small part of the conversation. We want to be talking about the bits of your local environment that you really, really value, and how we can make those better. And Rhoda, who is the head of engagement at Lancashire Wildlife Trust, some of you might know, but sits on our consortium, and she's often talking about how when you know that you can make a little change, it really, really helps you to engage with those huge problems in a positive way rather than a negative one. And I think that's what we're trying to do. I'm someone who has had massive climate anxiety, and I think a lot of people of my generation probably sit somewhere on that spectrum. But through this work, through the small changes, you start to see actually we could have an impact. And some of the self-organizing communities that you see are doing really, really interesting things in terms of kind of planning wind farms that the community owns, and that electricity powering their communities. There's all really, really interesting sustainable practices that come from these models when they're well looked after and allowed to be ambitious and well invested in as well.
I completely agree. And I think it is more about amplifying those voices. I think it's often the scariest or sort of most negative voices that get amplified. But actually, if we spend some time amplifying those positive stories and the communities that are trying to make a difference in their own locality, then that might have ripple effects much further than we can initially imagine. So Harvey, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just a quick one. So you mentioned at the beginning you had some challenges with the funding and getting going, and then also you mentioned about the overlooked communities and how you could get into those communities. So I suppose my question is just a bit more about that overcoming those challenges. Were there any key ones, and how did you manage to overcome them to get things going?
Yeah, so I suppose I actually wasn't involved in any of the governance challenges, and that's probably a quirk of Creative People and Places programs and how they're set up. They have to be held by a voluntary organisation, but it's a huge amount of Arts Council money, and sometimes voluntary organisations have difficult times, and that really is a context of that one. And it was fixed by other voluntary organisations stepping up, doing a really, really good job. I suppose in terms of the overlooked communities, you have to really understand the barriers that people are that are facing to engaging in anything. So we do start a lot with data. So we do a lot of postcode analysis. We use the household deprivation statistics. They really help us to pinpoint geographically where people are living that are target communities and where those clusters are. And then I suppose that the big thing that we do, and we have permission and time to do this, is that we go and sit in those communities in their public spaces. So we do a lot of work on kind of residential greens in places that the council tell us are kind of antisocial hotspots. But we'll go there every week. We'll put up a gazebo and we'll start an art club, and that for us has been, you know, a really, really slow way to just meet people and start to change how people think of that area, to introduce neighbours to each other. I think that's one of the big things that we find is that these communities that just aren't working, really, really difficult, overlooked communities, there's no connection there. People don't know their neighbours. And when you start to address that, you start to rebuild a sense of pride in place again. So yeah, just being in place. There's lots of movements that are doing kind of interesting work around this, like the public living rooms as a concept as well. But we like to do it through art. I think normally an art club brings out the kids, and then the parents have to come with them because that's a rule that we've enforced. And then the parents have to talk to each other because they're just hanging around an art club. And I think that really, really helps if you can start to get people thinking about something good for their kids that they can keep going and maintain, just as a starting point.
Thanks, Harvey. And yeah, it's nice to hear that you've got that time and permission to do that. And so that's often the hardest bit with funded projects, is not having time to just spend in communities and build those connections. Maya, you've also got your hand up.
Yeah, so my question kind of follows on a little bit. I know that you talked about like kind of artists being able to create space for like a community, and kind of not feeling like, I think you said like parental. And I wanted to ask, like, what would you say are some of kind of the other important aspects in creating a community discussion that feels, I guess, like inclusive and kind of non-extractive?
Yeah, well, I suppose you have to have the conversation on their terms. You can't lead it. It has to be a no agenda conversation. Ultimately, the most important thing that we do is brews, like a cup of tea together, a comfortable place to sit. Is such a huge bit of that. But then again, that artist, and when you get a really good artist, and we're lucky in this part of the world, my God, we've got great artists with incredible facilitation skills who are really, really good at, first of all, having a one-to-one conversation and having a really good, meaningful interaction like a human, but then being able to just find that spark of something, that moment that can take the conversation to the next level, or could unveil something that could be made, or is an interesting part of a conversation. And then I suppose the third part of that, once you've built that trust and you've got that relationship with people, is that making something together is such a foundational, amazing thing to do. The sense of pride that someone gets from making, often the overlooked communities we're working with, people haven't made something for themselves since they were at school, and it can be a really, really small thing. It can be quite an intricate and skilled thing. It could be something that we make as a big group, or it could be just something they make for themselves. But that moment of having made something and taking that away is often a feeling that people haven't had in a while. We also, sorry, now I'm going on, but the other thing that we often like to talk about is when people make together, they have conversations that they couldn't have if they were face to face. These kind of sideways conversations that you can have with someone when you're both doing something else. I think someone said that you often have really good conversations in the car for the same reason that you're not looking at each other, but making spaces facilitate that really, really nicely. And the friendships that you build through a newly developed hobby can become really, really far reaching as well. So yeah, I think there's lots to it about what an artist can do. But yeah, I suppose most of it is around that slightly outsider mentality, that observer mentality, and then being able to bring the joy of making.
Thank you. That's really interesting.
Thanks, Maya. And Tom, has anyone got any final questions before we finish off the session today? Great. So yeah, thank you so much, Miranda and Tom, for sharing what you do, sharing your different perspectives to all of us sort of in the environment sector, sort of learning from how you're doing it over in the arts. I think there's lots to take away, and hopefully lots of potential collaborations in the future. So I will be sending out the recording of this webinar. It goes on the Lancaster website, and then yeah, if anyone, Miranda, I think you said you had a few extra bits to send, so I can send those through to everyone who's joined the call today as well. But brilliant, thanks everyone.
Sam, just before we go, looking ahead to the next one, so we're having a bit of a break, aren't we, over the summer? So the next session is actually the 25th of September, and that one is the subject of that one is understanding climate science. So we've got two academics from Lancaster University who are going to be taking us through some climate science. So hopefully that'll be quite interesting to people who are passionate about this kind of thing but don't necessarily understand some of the details. So all of that information will be sent out as well over the summer and beforehand. So hopefully we'll see you there as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Have a nice day.
Thank you.